Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, it is currently Sunday, the 10th of April, 2022, 8/18, 2018. Um, I, I don't know why I feel like some need to say that, but I always do. It's kind of weird. And I also need to comment on it, and I could just move by. Why? I don't know. So I have some thoughts on some things that I talked about recently, mainly because there's been some new information. And so before I get to the thing I want to talk about tonight, I wanted to revisit, well, one thing I wanted to revisit is the slap. And I know I talked at that, or at length about that, and the slap, it's funny, maybe 5 years from now or at some indeterminate point in the future, that won't mean anything to you. That would be great. But what I mean is, of course, Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars in 2022. Um, the thing about this, and I talked a lot about it, and I have a lot of thoughts on it. Like, I understand. It is, and actually, I regret calling it violence in my thing in retrospect. Not that it's not violence, but it is one of these things where it's on the, like, and I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying you can just go up to some random person and slap them. Um, but, but, is it violence to do something that causes basically no harm? I don't know. It's certainly more than yelling at somebody, but it's also much less than, and I talked about scale, I guess, but it's much less than like actually inflicting some kind of harm. Um, and I think it's also probably like there's a behavior that was, one might say, antisocial, and the by which I mean like Chris Rock's air quotes joke, and that slap probably will change that behavior. I suspect. We'll see. But maybe Chris Rock will go on to keep telling the same kind of jokes. I would like to think that he raises the caliber a little bit and maybe does jokes that are outside of the realm of like middle school level jokes. I don't know. We'll see. But I don't really want to talk about any of that right now. What I wanted to talk about there is just there have now been sort of official consequences to this. So, first of all, Will Smith resigned from the Academy. I have no idea what the significance of that is, other than I'm sure it's a pretty significant thing for someone of his caliber, or probably anyone, frankly, to do. Um, but that seems like a pretty big consequence to me. You know, it's like, did this thing, people weren't happy with it, there's a consequence. And should there be more consequences? Well, I don't know. To me, that seems like maybe enough. The forced apology seems like maybe enough. And again, I'm not trying to say that I want to encourage this sort of thing. I want to, you know, it's a delicate line because obviously it's not nothing. It is something, right? And I don't want to imply that it's nothing. I don't want to say like you can just walk up to somebody on the street and slap them and it's fine. But I also, I mean, I don't know. I kind of feel like one thing that we really lack in our civilization at the moment, and I think that I've talked at length about this actually, but is any semblance of shame, and not just shame, but social consequences for things. And by that, I don't mean necessarily, like, obviously, getting slapped is not a shaming, but it is telling you, like, okay, you did something, you stepped over the line, here's a consequence. We kind of live in a world where there is no line, essentially. I mean, Louis C.K. can lock women in, like, a room with him and force them to watch him masturbating, and he can still win a Grammy, right? Roman Polanski can literally be a convicted, child rapist and still win a fucking Oscar. You know, I'm not sure about the chronology of that, but basically, yeah. It's there's not a lot of line, is what I'm saying. I've talked a lot about fucking Harvey Weinstein too. I mean, this guy, everybody knew, everybody knew his whole history with all the shit that he was doing to women, and he was still just a few months before going to prison for it. He was going out to comedy clubs surrounded by people, and when some woman got on stage and said something about it, she got ejected, not him. You know, we live in a world where there are not a lot of consequences. Kirsten Sinema, you know, she can basically stand up and tell her constituents to fuck themselves. She like honestly, I would feel better if she came out and said just, you know, fuck you, Scott. Yeah, you voted for me. I'm not going to do anything for you. Fuck you. If she said that, it would be less offensive. But she has no consequence. There's no shame. She knows that, you know, and I'm not saying that somebody should go out and slap her or slap Mitch McConnell for being a complete dick face. Or, you know, I mean, fucking Clarence Thomas. I mean, there are just no consequences for people. People can go on, do horrible things, and have very successful careers. And, you know, I mean, it's fucked up because here I'm talking about something where there was a consequence. So the consequence is that the Academy has decided that Will Smith, my understanding is basically, is not going to be eligible to be Best Actor for the next decade. And I don't know. I mean, you think about this, and in addition to this, he's been on his upcoming projects. As far as I know, pretty much all of them have been just put on ice. A lot of consequences he's facing. Meanwhile, Chris Rock, not a lot of consequences. And it's just like that disparity, that incongruity. I can't help but think, honestly, like, one of the reasons for this, and this is just something that keeps coming up in my mind, mainly because it reminds me, obviously, when I was picked on, I was in middle school and younger. And when that happened, and it wasn't, I would not consider, well, one of the two times I guess you could say is violence. I just had this like innate reaction and just hit my palm against the kid's head. He went down and I went away. But the other one, is it violence to pick somebody up and push them against the blackboard? Now, could that guy have gotten injured? I mean, I guess there's the little piece that sticks out for the chalk. In theory, certainly. I don't think it was realistic or likely. And certainly if like something happened, it would be kind of a freak accident. Is that violence? It's definitely not violence, but it's also very different from, I don't know, anything that has a real intent to commit physical harm. So, you know, and as an adult, maybe that would count as assault. I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question there. I wouldn't want to find out. Obviously, I don't know. You have to think about the consequences. You have to think about the circumstance. And I just can't, you know, I mean, you think about the history. I pretty much my whole life have followed the rules to almost a fault. You know, I'm not somebody who gets in trouble a lot. And so that kid who you know is getting picked on by this other kid, who you know is picking on a lot of other kids, when the kid that's just kind of like straight-laced and very quiet finally gets pushed a little too far and takes some kind of action, that means something different than the kid that's just like aggressive and abusive and bullying people does something, right? So I think, I don't know, I think about like Will Smith. He's been in the public eye for decades, right? I don't know how old he is offhand. I probably should have looked that up before, but I know he's older than I am. And I know he's, you know, I mean, I think Fresh Prince was his first thing, and that was what, in the 90s? So, in fact, I guess he had Fresh Prince and DJ Jazzy Jeff. So he was doing music before the show. I'm pretty sure it came before the show, and then it became the show, or it became an aspect of the show. And you think about this, and it's like, okay, from that time, let's just say the mid 90s, to now we're almost to the mid 2020s. So 2005-ish, 2015, 2025. That's like almost 30 years. Borderline approaching, in my rough back of the envelope math, like order of 30 years. In that time, as far as I'm aware, he has behaved exemplary. Like, not even the slightest hint of anything. Not somebody who seems at all antisocial. Not somebody who seems at all, like, I've never even seen him raise his voice, honestly. Like, maybe as a character, but in real life, never hear about it. There are actors, certainly, who you hear about, like, getting abusive. There are people like Ellen DeGeneres where you're like, yeah, seems to be, like, the number of stories that you hear about her being very abusive to people working for her, they're very abundant. And Will Smith, not a fucking peep of this stuff. And you do kind of think someone of his tier, maybe I just haven't heard about it, but feel free to research and tell me that I'm wrong here. As far as I know, not a thing. So 3 decades, which, and I think he started, I assume he was like a teenager, because he must have been, certainly his character was a teenager in Fresh Prince, so I'm guessing he was a teenager then. So basically his whole adult life, nothing. And then one thing which, and I understand a lot of people are like super traumatized by this, and they're like, it was not that big of a fucking deal. Just to be clear, not that big of a deal. But, I get you're triggered by any hint of anything that approaches violence. I mean, there are far more violent things that happen. I've witnessed far more violent things than that. I mean, when you think about, like, it's just, people, right now, I mean, people are getting killed in various places, not just Ukraine, but in various places around the world. People are getting murdered. Like, that's fucking violent. Kids get shot in schools. That's fucking violent. I mean, and not just shot, but I mean, like, so much stuff happens, and there's basically no consequence to it. Dick Cheney shot his friend in the face. I mean, now, tiny little bird shot, but still, it's a little bit violent, This, on the scale of violence, it's something, right? It's not zero, but it's not, if you're talking like a 0 to 100 scale, this is in the low single digits by any reasonable metric. And so I think about that, and then you think, like, okay, long history of nothing, probably extenuating circumstances. You think about, he's telling this joke, and this is a joke that he's picked on Jada before, and Jada's kind of upset about this from previously, and he ignored being asked about it. And then, you get into this situation, and maybe there's some extenuating stuff as well. But, you think about it, it's like, okay, he's already a little, I'm using he for both Chris Rock and Will Smith is already a little on edge, maybe for other reasons. And then she's upset. And then, it's like, okay, well, you're upset, and this is the situation. I don't know what to do. I'm frustrated with this. Talking hasn't really solved it. And I don't want to go back and re-prosecute the whole thing. But the thing that I want to get to is, you look at this consequence. It's like, somebody has had such a history, and one little tiny fucking thing that, even if it was a big fuck up, and again, I don't think it was that big of a fuck up, but even if it was a massive fuck up, the idea, I mean, fucking Mark Wahlberg, Mark Wahlberg has beat the shit out of people. That's some fucking violence. Like, this has done some serious damage. And Will Smith, slapped a guy in the face. I mean, like, have a sense of fucking proportion, is all I'm saying. Mark Wahlberg, zero consequences for that, as far as I know. Maybe he went to jail for a little bit, in prison. But in terms of his career, negligible. Yeah. And I don't know, you look at this, and this seems to, like, I'm not saying it's going to completely end Will Smith's career, but he's not that young, and a lot of his projects are on ice, and then he's not going to get another award for a decade, and probably going to have a bunch of people distancing themselves from him for a very long time. It could end his career. He could be basically retired now, or maybe he comes out of retirement and the next time we see him, he's kind of looking like an old man, and he's doing sort of a totally different thing than he could do now. And I mean, it's not a proportional consequence. And it's hard for me, I mean, just as someone who at least likes to see themselves as reasonably rational, it's hard to look at that and not think that race is a major factor. Like, and I mean, there's this whole thing. It's like, the confirmation hearings recently. If you look at the fucking Kavanaugh, this motherfucker, now we don't know that he's a rapist, but definitely he's rapist adjacent, right? At least. That is, I think, an established fact. He cried on the stand because he likes beer and all this other bullshit. This is not a person who belongs on the Supreme Court. And the newest justice basically goes through totally exemplary, and I mean, just the disparity between Kavanaugh being a complete piece of shit and her being exceptional by any measure. Kavanaugh, I think, got 50 votes and she got 53. Yeah, I mean, which is fucking ridiculous. Like, she should get like 99 votes. And the one vote is because somebody's out with a stroke or something. I mean, it should not be, now I understand, obviously politics has gone completely off the rails and we can't have normal procedures and all this kind of stuff, but it's just fucking insane. And you think about like the stuff that people said about her during these hearings, and it's just like, I mean, I don't remember the exact quote, but I was reading something today that was basically like, we being, in this case it was black women, but if you're black, you have to be 10 times better than just to qualify. And if you're only 9 times better, then you're considered deficient. And I mean, you look at like Will Smith, compared to, like, if you put a scatter plot and you took out names and you just put where everybody is, he's like several standard deviations better by any measure than I would say most actors. I don't mean better necessarily in terms of acting skill, but in terms of how he's comported himself, in terms of like fuck ups and things like this, just kind of like tiptoeing and dancing fine lines and all this kind of stuff. For decades, one little thing and just up in fucking smoke. And I mean, I don't know, you just look at fucking Clint Eastwood. I mean, that stupid shit that he did talking to the imaginary Obama in the chair, that racist fucking bullshit. And also, I mean, like Clint Eastwood, this was not a surprise because, I mean, it was kind of a surprise to me because I didn't know very much about his history, but apparently pretty bad history if you go back into like the 70s or before. I mean, he's never been like a great guy, but you just look at that and you like, the consequences that somebody gets are so disproportionate. I don't know. And then you get people who sit there and say like, oh, racism it's not a thing. It doesn't exist anymore. It's like, oh, that stuff is like back. Are you fucking shitting me? I mean, you have to be, I mean, the thing about this is, like, frankly, when somebody says that, they're either lying or stupid, because it's not even a subjective thing. You can look at all of these metrics, and by many, many metrics, whether you want to look at like individual wealth or familial wealth, or so, yeah, I mean, I keep going to like socioeconomic status, but you know, progress through careers or debt or education or anything like this. If you look at it and you project it along race, it actually makes a big fucking difference. And then you're gonna say racism isn't a thing anymore? Are you fucking nuts? It's a objectively, quantitatively existing, observable thing. It's not something that you can just sort of say is like, oh no, it's a... And then also, I think like one thing that's very serious about it is a lot of the people who are like so upset about Will Smith, they're not the sort of MAGA racist people who most of us will agree on inspection are racist. A lot of these are sort of the more liberalish, sort of younger. They're not like boomers. It's like, oh, those racist boomers. No, I know people who are my age and significantly younger who are upset beyond measure about this. And like, I understand, okay, maybe there are extenuating circumstances. Maybe you have a history of being in abusive relationships, or you had an abusive parent, or you live or work in like shelters for that kind of stuff, and so you're kind of sensitized to it. But the thing is, I mean, we have to me at least, and maybe I'm just nuts here, but it seems like there should be some kind of just, I mean, the last one of these that I did, or maybe it was two ago, was scale. You have to talk about like what things, I mean, I don't know, not everything is the same as everything else. It's not like 0 or 100. There's a whole fucking spectrum. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating as shit to see that. It's frustrating to see, like, obviously, now, you know, the people, nobody ever wants to say they're racist. So obviously you're not going to get people to admit that. But at a certain point, like, you see that and you're like, I don't know. Is it racism or is it something else? I suspect that if it was a white dude, we can't conduct this experiment, but I suspect if it was a white dude, you'd be less bothered by it. I'm pretty sure. I can't conduct the experiment, so it's speculation. But I'd be willing to fucking bet. And maybe there are people who really are, I mean, not maybe, obviously, there are people who are triggered by even the slightest hint of violence. There are people who really, this was kind of a, you know, like, there are people who've never seen anything of that like. They've lived an extraordinarily privileged life, and nothing like that has ever entered to their world, which is crazy, because I've lived a pretty privileged life. I have seen somebody beat the shit out of somebody else. You know, I've seen that. I've not been like personally in a fight that went more than one blow, but as a kid, and I'm a pretty, yeah, I'm a pretty just sort of like white dude that's not had, you know, reasonably decent socioeconomic status, and kind of not going into high crime areas, not really living in bad circumstances. I've seen like dabs of this stuff. I don't know how people have missed this. And especially also, I mean, you see so many depictions of much more graphic violence in media, and it's stunning to me that people will be like, have the reaction that they've had to this thing. And so I'm trying not to attribute it all to racism. Like, I do understand if you've never seen any kind of violence, maybe all of it seems like all of it. That like anything seems like everything. But I do think like the lack of scale, and then at a certain point, it's just impossible for me to think. Both, and I mean, the reasons I think racism enter into this is not just that people had this like horrible like reaction to it. It's also, and a lot of white women, frankly. I mean, yeah, I've seen so many fucking, not to put people in like little bins, but I've seen so many that we're like, you know, and to me, I mean, you just look at that and it's just, they certainly would not admit to being racist. Most people wouldn't think that they're racist. But, you know, I suspect there's a twinge of it. And also, like, the other aspect of this that I think is a major factor, and in my opinion at least, is that the consequences. So there's the reaction that people have had, and then the just ridiculously disproportionate consequences. It's hard to imagine, you know, that feels to me a lot like that you've got to be 10 times better, and if you're 9.9 times better, you're not good enough. And I mean, even the 10 times better might be, you know, maybe you have to be 100 times better, and you can't be 99 times better. It's inadequate. And he just revealed that he's not perfect and made some little slip, and now he's complete shit to people. Yeah, would you have more charity if he didn't look the way that he looks? I don't know. I suspect so. And again, I don't know. I can't read your mind. I can't conduct the experiment and rerun reality with, I don't know who the white equivalent of Will Smith would be, but you know, you can't do the experiment. So it's just speculative. But it's hard for me to believe that that's not the case. That if it was somebody else, you know, if I'm trying to think of someone, I'm terrible with ages. It's really sad, but it's the Family Guy's name. If Seth MacFarlane got up on stage and slapped somebody and then said, you know, don't keep my wife's name, or I don't know if he has a wife, or if he's gay or whatever. Keep my SO's name out of your mouth. If he did that, I kind of suspect that he'd be like, all of his projects would be going on and nothing else would really happen. You know, I mean, like, people might talk about it a little bit, but I don't think it would be this big of a deal. And I don't know, it's disappointing because I'm under no delusion, to be fair, that we're as far along as I would hope. I mean, it's, yeah, you look at people from the civil rights era, and they're not that old. The ones that survived, not that old now. You know, John Lewis just died, but he wasn't that old. MLK, if he wasn't shot, he would still be. He wouldn't be that. I mean, he wouldn't be young, but he wouldn't be like super geriatric. I guess depending on there are people in Congress who are older than him. Yeah, and you just look at like how recent that is, and the amount of, I don't know, it's frustrating. The extent to which we're not further along than one would hope it's very disappointing. It's very frustrating, and I do know, like, things take time, but at a certain point, you're like, it's been a while. Let's kind of like wrap this shit up and move on with shit. And I know we're nowhere near that, and it's so. I don't know how you get there too. This is the thing that I find frustrating with a lot of the problems of where we are, because there are so many aspects, so many major problems, like the thing, like, you know, even somebody who should by rights be confirmed by the entire Senate, it gets like 53 votes, and it's a miracle that a couple of Republicans vote to confirm her. How do you fix that? How do you fix the whole like Trumpism thing? How do you fix the fact that there was a French election today, and it's happened a few times, a handful of times, I think. Le Pen, fucking, yeah, I mean, to call her a Nazi wouldn't be completely out of the realm of reason. I mean, you know, like, pretty fucking right-wing person. I think she got like 24% of the vote. I could be wrong about that, but order of that. And then there's going to be a runoff, and people are going to have to, you know, vote against her. But which again, like, it just feels like there should be a better way to deal with that. Like, it's the same situation here with like Trump versus Biden. Like, both of them are pieces of shit, but you put a gun to my head, and obviously I have to pick Biden between the two, even though I know a lot of people who say like, oh, they're just as bad, or Biden's. I know people saying Biden is worse. I just can't accept that. You know, I mean, like, in terms of it, just almost any measure, anything, any reasonable metric, whether it's just making statements on like trans day of visibility, or, and I know that a statement is not everything, but it's something, right? In terms of who they're going to nominate for the Supreme Court, or for, you know, running the EPA or the FCC or whatever, there are differences, you know, and I get frustrated by people who sort of act like, I don't know if it's just ignorance, or if it's this, like, they're not ignorant, but they have this kind of toy model of how reality works, that, yeah. But whatever it is, and then we get to education. Like, education, Arizona, I think, is like, depending on which measure you look at, we're something like 49th out of the 50 states. Yeah, some places 50, some places 48. Depends on how you measure it, but basically we're not dead last, but we're pretty much taking up the rear. And this is a deliberate choice. This is like our pandemic response, or complete fucking lack of pandemic response. This is something which has been done intentionally. People have deliberately defunded education here. Yeah, it's funny. I went to defund the police, and that's the most controversial thing in the world. People act like, defund the police, Scott, are you crazy? How will women who've been raped, not that women are the only ones that get raped, but yeah, how will people who've been raped ever get any justice? Well, you know, I mean, all the rape kits that are just sitting on the shelves, all of the cases where police just ignore them, yeah, doesn't really. How will people who have things stolen? Yeah, I had well, my ex-wife had a Ford Explorer, and somebody stole it. Somebody stole it, and we call the cops, which I've only done a couple of times in my life for things like this. Call the cops, and the cops are basically like laughing, like, you know, oh yeah, sure, we're gonna find your car for you. Like, what the fuck is your point of existing? I mean, if you look at what they do, it's beyond worthless. The only time I ever see cops doing anything, and I say this, and I know it sounds hyperbolic, but the only time in daily life that I encounter them is I will be driving around, and I'll see like 2 or 3 of their SUVs, and they're out like fucking with homeless people. Like, literally, that's what they're doing. Aside from that, and it's a much, much smaller fraction of times, I see them come into like the NAACP Youth Council, or you know, something like that, where they're kind of like going out, we're going to go talk to the community and tell people that we're good people, we're not, you know, like, and yeah, they're just doing PR shit. And then you see people, I don't know, I mean, it's hard to really accept that they're worth a fuck, you know? And you look at, I mean, I've talked about this before, but statistically, across precincts, the numbers are pretty consistent. I've not looked at an exhaustive list, but I've looked at a decent sampling of them, and I've looked at, you know, like big ones like LA, and then small ones like some like Door County or something. And you look at or my own local ones, and you look at these, and something like 5% of the work that they do has anything at all to do with violent crime. Everything else does not need to be done by any reasonable metric by somebody who is armed. That's just completely simple and objective. You look at that and you're like, okay, we can cut 95% of your motherfuckers out of there right now. And then you look at the 5%, and for the most part, they're like, if they're responding to somebody who's violent or anything like this, they're coming after the fact. They're not stopping people from getting stabbed or shot or killed. They're coming in and doing stuff later and just talking to people. occasionally they pursue people, but for the most part, even there, like my mom freaks out about this all the time, but in LA, they have almost daily pursuits on the freeways, and people, like innocent people, get killed because the cops are playing fucking Grand Theft Auto with somebody who's stolen a car, and it's just not. I don't know. It's one of these things that's just maddening to me because I am not like a crazy radical person. I'm somebody who, honestly, I'm not even gonna say I'm conservative, but I'm pretty, I'm not like way out there, you know. The things that I think and that I want are pretty, like to me, pretty like obvious and simple. Whether they're responses to COVID or other pandemics, or I mean, just like general public health. People should fucking wash their hands. People who are in food service should be wearing masks anyway. Like it should have nothing to do with the pandemic. That should just be part of the policy. Just if you're gonna prepare food, wear a goddamn mask. Probably wear gloves as well. And if you touch something or you contaminate it, understand aseptic technique, which you have learned because everybody in, I don't know, middle school or something should have done just microbial ubiquity. Just take some nutrient auger plates, move them around the air, have some kids, like, not the same ones, but have them like draw like smiley faces or something in them, get some swabs and, do all these things. And then they're like, oh shit, there's shit everywhere. And now you just imagine, okay, literally everything is covered in literal shit. And maybe you'd use different language for the kids, I don't know, but everybody learns that, and then you're like, okay, well, just imagine that every time you touch something, if you wash your hands and then you brush against something, now you're contaminated. And if you touch that and then you touch something over here, you've just transferred everything that's over there over here. It's not that complicated. This is the thing that's annoying to me. It's not complicated. If you're talking about things that are airborne, understanding how they're transmitted and how to do something about them, it's literally stuff that you could teach kids in middle school. It's not that complicated. And you have the fucking director of the CDC fucking this up. Now, in fairness, being like strong-armed, I'm sure, by Biden to fuck it up, and also being strong-armed by Biden to have a scale on the charts where like the strongest is like a blue, and then it kind of goes to like greenish to yellow instead of, like we got to get rid of the yellow and the red and the green. It's got to all be kind of like mellow. I mean, you can feel the pressure there. And it just makes me feel crazy because it's so simple and obvious. And it's annoying as well because, if I was to define myself there, I would say I'm relatively conservative again. And yet, to me, relatively conservative does not mean what the fucking right-wing nutjobs mean, who are honestly like radical anarcho-capitalists. There's no way to look at anything that the Republicans are doing and call it conservative. It's frustrating as shit. And especially like the ones that talk about how they're constitutional originalists or some bullshit, like as though the people who wrote the Constitution had a good fucking clue, or didn't have like the 3/5 compromise or all of these other things, or the fucking 13th Amendment even. It's like, well, we're gonna abolish slavery, but not entirely. I mean, when you learn that, it's like, oh, we'd never abolished slavery. We kind of did. But we said like except as punishment. Psych, fingers crossed, wink, wink. And you just think about it. It's like, what the fuck? So to me, a conservative thing would be to protect the environment, our environment, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the climate that we're all subject to, and not just us individually. I mean, if the wet bulb temperature is too high outside, it's not compatible with human life. We need a heat sink, and if it's too hot, it doesn't work. So that's a thing that to me seems like kind of important to keep the world livable. But also, you think about little things like growing crops. If the climate changes drastically, then where you can grow crops changes. And, I mean, like maybe things just move north, although weather gets more extreme and, building good topsoil isn't something that just happens overnight either. So you think about it, it's like maybe the conservative thing would be not to have a giant fucking truck, because, I mean, the most ridiculous thing about these two, giant fucking pickup truck, but obviously you can't have, if it was a proper pickup truck, it would only have the front, but they want to have it for their normal like daily driver. So they have kids or they have other people, and a pickup truck's not practical. So it's like, okay, we're gonna put a big cab in the back. So now it's like a car kind of like jammed into a truck, and you can't have something that's like hyper long. So that eats into the truck bed, and then you're gonna have the spare tire maybe in the back of in the bed of the truck. So now you have a truck bed that's almost fucking useless to load anything. Certainly not like filling it up with gravel or something. Not that the people that have these things are doing shit like that anyway. And then you have these assholes who come in and they're like, oh, well, they're going to use it for towing. And okay, maybe you use it for towing one time in 3 years. I think even that for most of these people is an exaggeration. Like, I don't think they might think that they're going to, but it's like, you might think that you're going to fly, but are you going to actually fly? Probably not. You might think that you're going to go, you get that gym membership. You think you're going to go to the gym. And yeah, some people do, but a lot of people don't. It's like that. Most of the people who have these big fucking trucks don't need them. And there's nothing conservative about having something that gets like 14 miles to the gallon and is going to murder people if it hits them because it's so massive. There's nothing conservative about having your headlights up in people's faces and causing that kind of a distraction and difficulty for other drivers. There's nothing conservative about any of this bullshit. There's nothing conservative about like digging oil everywhere. There's nothing conservative about leaking methane into the air and having massive, I mean, in addition to just being a horrible greenhouse gas that's much stronger, much better at that than CO2, it's not the best thing to be breathing methane, and yet we're just like leaking it out into the air like it's no big deal. There's nothing conservative about dumping toxic waste into rivers. There's nothing conservative, I mean, like, is there something conservative about like letting kids, and the people who claim to be pro-life, letting kids have guns in schools? Or, like having, in a society that has, incidentally, these are the same people who are super pro-cop, and they feel the need to have a gun with them all the time because, their stories also are like, well, what are the cops gonna do? They fucking apply that thinking, first of all, to like, yes, defund the motherfuckers, but also, like, you don't need a gun. You don't. 99% of the people that have guns have zero use for them. The only time you'd ever actually need a gun is if society collapses and it's like some kind of like end of the world fantasy. And it is no fantasy if things go very, very far south. I'm not sure your guns are going to help you too much. And hopefully that doesn't happen too, because and then also like I don't remember what the numbers were, but it's something obscene. Obviously, like, big asterisk here, like I'm pulling these numbers out of my memory, and I last looked this stuff up like years ago. But it's something crazy, like 1% of gun owners own, like, certainly the majority, but I think it was something like 90% or more of the guns. It's just an absurd amount owned by a few people. And there's nothing conservative there. Why do they, I hate that they get that word. They get to talk about being patriotic, and yet they're sitting there putting up their fucking, Confederate flags. Are you shitting me? Like, these were fucking traitor states. This is not, there's nothing patriotic about defacing the US flag and having this, like, fucking pig fucking flag with the blue line and desaturated colors. That's not patriotic. Go fuck yourselves. I mean, it just irritates the shit out of me. And anyway, the thing, so, like, stripping education is what I wanted to get to. And how do you fix that? I don't know. One of the things that I think we need to address, and this is going to get to the actual topic of the show. So I think it's actually almost I don't know that I've ever done one of these where I started the actual topic at the top and continued through it, but I definitely know that almost always it's like talk for 45 minutes and then, oh yeah, by the way, the thing I wanted to talk about, and the reason that actually part of the reason that I'm recording tonight is because it was like one of these burning things that was bothering me. It's STEM and STEAM. And the reason that this was bothering me is I drove by a school today and I saw something that said, we're a STEAM campus. And I have some thoughts on this. First off, I am somebody who loves education. Especially like undergrad was amazing. I love art as well. I love engineering. I love sciences. My whole life, I've always just been fascinated with science and technology. And my love of like history and I guess philosophy came on earlier. History was like a later addition. I think it was mainly because I'm thinking about it. I think the big thing that got me about history was I was taught it in a way when I was younger that had a heavy emphasis on memorizing Battle of Hastings 1066 or something like that, and you just have to memorize these dates and names and things, and I just didn't feel it, you know. I didn't have, because it's full of these like rich stories and things that are actually interesting, and yet, you know, it was so much of that kind of stuff, and also like so much fucking this is one of these things that I didn't recognize until I think I started picking up on it a while back, but I really started like coming into focus maybe 10 years ago. Just the amount of propaganda that I was subjected to. I mean, it like in my K through 12 education, we covered the American colonial period. And when I say covered it, I do want to say, I don't want to imply that like I have detailed, deep knowledge of it. I mean, it was kind of like a cartoon level, some bullet points, but mostly like a lot of hand waving and not really much depth. And a lot of stuff like learning Benjamin Franklin myths that turns out probably are mostly bullshit and a bunch of crap that he made up about himself, and people just like bought it because he was a good marketeer, and he was able to, as Postmaster General, he was able to like not let other publications go out, which is it's an interesting thing. But moving back, I learned about this stuff, and I don't remember how many times we covered it, but easily, out of those 12 years, I'm sure it was not just a half dozen times. I think it was probably closer to like 8 of those years we covered it. Like we went through something about like, several times I remember covering Martin Luther, which is kind of weird actually also in retrospect. It's like, it's interesting to know, don't get me wrong, but we didn't talk a lot about ancient Israel or something. We didn't talk a lot about, I guess we did talk a little bit about ancient Egypt, but just really in the sense that, like Alexander was there and like some little bullet points and some things that, but a lot of like hand waving. Certainly didn't talk very much about India. I mean, in the pre-colonial period, like not at all. China, I think I remember talking about like a couple of dynasties a few times, and that was kind of it. And you think about all the history that even places like Polynesia or Hawaii, we covered in the sense that they had something to do with colonialism. And that was like the whole thing. It was like a education about how colonialism works, and nothing happened anywhere until European contact. And it was pretty good. And we didn't really like the whole like North Atlantic slave trade and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, didn't really get into that. I don't think we ever talked about Haiti, the history there. And I mean, it's just, there's so much there that we never covered. And so anyway, though, I love I love science. I love technology. I like engineering. I like math. And I like art. At a certain point, though, like people, and this is the thing that pisses me off, people got obsessed with turning education into vocational training. This is where the STEM thing comes from in the first place, because it's not that people wanted people to learn about science, technology, engineering, and math because they thought it would be good for them to build a nice foundation. They wanted people to learn these things because they're like, oh, well, all the jobs are in science, technology, engineering, and math, so we got to teach people that stuff. Which, as somebody who loves those subjects, I think is the most asinine bullshit fucking logic. And then art, they kind of threw in, I think they threw in the art for a variety of reasons, but there's the whole Steve Jobs, partially mythos and partially true. He was a dropout at Stanford, and I think it was Stanford. It'd be funny if I was saying the wrong school. But then he popped into a calligraphy class and learned about typography, and that kind of fed into WYSIWYG and all this kind of stuff. And so we need to know about art, because art, it turns out, is kind of useful in terms of making money, which is not what fucking art is about. And then we never talk about philosophy, never talk about ethics, never talk about, I've taken classes on these things, but it was like me going out of my way to do it. It wasn't like a thing that people would generally do, and certainly not, not a thing that everybody did in grade school or middle school or high school. And there's so much there to learn just to be good, informed citizens. If you really took democracy seriously and you wanted to be, in air quotes, like a genuine conservative, one of the things you'd want to do is have a well-educated populace, because people are voting for representatives, and they're voting in cases like Arizona, we have direct democracy. People are making decisions that have massive impacts, and they're doing it with really no training and no education for the most part. Like education based on stuff that has nothing to do with these things, and understanding also like the consequences of stuff. What are the ethical and moral implications of doing X? And it's weird too, because there are a lot of these people who are like hyper religious, and they want to put like some theology in, but of course it's only their theology, and even then it's like their version of, because you would think, if you taught Christianity the way that, like, I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of religion, just to say. I have a superficial knowledge of what this is. But if you taught it, and you taught it with some fidelity, I feel like they would think that was some hippie bullshit, and they'd be upset about it, and they wouldn't want their kids to learn that shit. They want their kids to learn, that somehow, even though the Bible, well, the Old Testament is maybe debatably like pro-abortion, and the New Testament, as far as I know, doesn't really talk about it. And then they'll pull out like these weird random things, which are like, oh, before you were even born, I created you and made you the Messiah or whatever. And then they'll turn that into somehow something that defends opposing abortion, and they make some kind of like justification for it. It's just like so fucking like disconnected to their shit. Like, to me, education, it's so valuable, and it has enriched my life so greatly, and I feel very sorry for, I feel very fortunate personally, but I feel very sorry for all the people who have come later and have been kind of fucked, or not just come later, but have lived in other places or not had the path that I had, and they've gotten fucked out of a lot of stuff there that makes your life just much richer, and it makes your, just the palette that you're painting images with in your mind, the thoughts that you can have they're so much more limited. And I understand, like, okay, well, I'm self-educated, I'm learning on YouTube or CuriosityStream or one of these, and it's like, yeah, okay, you can learn some things that way. Being an autodidact is good, but unless you have like a artificially intelligent tutor, essentially, unless you have someone whether it's a human being or some kind of AI, like, and not in the current sense that people throw around AI, but I mean like a genuinely like sentient artificial intelligence, like a genuinely artificial intelligence. Short of that, you're not getting a good education. You're getting some pieces, but there's so much that you're missing. And you don't, the problem with it is, of course, you don't know what you're missing because you don't know what you don't know. It's such a problematic thing. So the gist of what I'm trying to say here is I just fucking loathe the STEAM shit. I loathe the STEM shit. Just make it fucking education. Make it, and take away get rid of the whole idea that you're trying to make it vocational training. Now, yes, it will prepare you incidentally for various things in your future. And I say this all the time, but the education that I've had, I don't think there's anything that I've learned, however esoteric, that has never come in handy at some point down the road. And if it hasn't already, then I would certainly say that it probably will at some point. I think this is the thing, like, you never know. You can't throw the art in because you're like trying to engineer that happenstance, that sort of kismet with Steve Jobs going into the calligraphy class. You don't know what you're missing. You don't know, and I mean, you get all these fucking tech bros who've never taken a philosophy class and never have even thought about the implications of the shit that they're doing and the things that they're making. And they've never thought about, like, what are the ethical and moral implications of building these systems, or what are the consequences of having automated moderation rather than having human moderators. You have people who basically become bean counters, and they're like, oh, well, paying human moderators is going to be expensive, so we're just going to make some systems. And they have these clunky systems that don't work. And, like, okay, there are a bunch of people who fall through the cracks and face endless abuse because of it, but it doesn't affect the bottom line because they're, a fraction of a percent or some low single-digit percentage, not realizing that they're doing stuff at scales where a fraction of a percent of the population is millions of people. When you have hundreds of millions of users, 1%, if you have 100 million people, 1% is a million people, I believe. Is that right? I think so. I always am, you have no idea how nervous I am, even doing like a 0.01 times, like the simplest multiplication. In my head, when I'm doing one of these, I feel like I'm gonna fuck up. I would feel better, honestly, if I had a whiteboard here and I was like doing triple integrals and doing it. Because at least then, if I fucked it up, I would see it on the board. But here you're like, it's so easy to move the decimal place over or do something like that, and I know I do it. I'm certainly not infallible there. But anyway, with that, I think that's all I want to say for now. I will probably revisit this because I do have a lot to say. But I also feel like I've kind of gone on a while, and I want to go for my walk because I'm antsy and I need a nightly walk. That's what I do. So with that, thank you very much. Don't reduce education to vocational training, please. Just banish the whole concept of STEM and STEAM and all of that shit from your mind. It should not exist. Which is to say, have science, technology, engineering, math, and philosophy and art and literature and history. And education has a lot more to offer than just the STEM and the STEAM shit. And don't add letters to it and make it like, something more. Just scrub the idea. Get rid of it. So with that, thank you. Zai Jin.